Well, hi everyone. How is the sound? Is that give me a thumbs up if it's good and thumbs down if it's too loud or too quiet. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional landowners on which we're meeting, and we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Boonwurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I think it would be remiss, even though we're going to be talking about very advanced technology today, to not take a second and acknowledge that the first healthcare that was brought to Australia was by Australia's first people. 10,000 years ago, they were the first doctors, the first clinicians, they had the first medicine, but they also had the first technology, and we don't often think of that. And here in this building, we have the Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology at the University of Melbourne, and up on level 7, you can see a lovely display of Indigenous technology that's over 6,000 years old. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. My name is Olivia, and I'm really grateful to be here. I'm a senior research fellow at the Centre for Digital Transformation of Health at the University of Melbourne. And we have the humble ambition of trying to bring data and technology to Australia's healthcare system. Not just bring technology, but use data and technology to solve Australia's biggest healthcare crisis. And we're speaking today about one type of data and technology that's very exciting. We're going to be speaking about AI. And a really important piece of the puzzle when it comes to the AI transformation of Australia's healthcare system is, of course, our healthcare professionals and the students today who are training to become that workforce. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And I have 3 outstanding panelists who've joined me, who each have their own experience with AI, as well as their own perspectives on AI and how our healthcare workforce of today and the future needs to be trained. So let me introduce them, and then we'll jump into our questions. And I hope you're sticking around for the tour that we're doing at 1:45. You'll be able to see our Validitron, which is the space that the centre uses to test and evaluate new tools, including new AI. So, I have you in the opposite order, so I'm going to introduce you left to right. We have Patrick Bowers. He's an audiologist and lecturer in the Department of Audiology and Speech Pathology here at the University of Melbourne, and he leads the practical and experiential learning programs in the Masters of Clinical Audiology. His main research interest is in health profession education research, specifically in the fields of digital learning tools, communication, and feedback. On top of all of that, Patrick is also currently a PhD candidate. He's just done his confirmation this year, and he's investigating through his thesis the application of AI tools for driving communication skill development in healthcare profession students. Hi,
Thank
Patrick.
you. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Patrick. We also have Dr. Sarah Knight. She's a clinical neuropsychologist, researcher and senior lecturer at the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences, again here at the University of Melbourne, where she leads the Neurodevelopment in Context Lab. And her current research focuses on co-developing innovative interdisciplinary rehabilitation approaches and pathways for children who have neurodisability. And she has a really strong commitment to partnering with young people, families, and clinicians in their research, as well as using participatory research methods and implementation science.
Thanks, Olivia.
Hi, Sarah.
Such a delight to be here.
Thanks, Sarah. And finally, to my left, we have Dr. Rim Ghali. She's both a general practitioner and a PhD student at the Safer Families Centre. Her work focuses on improving health practitioners' responses to women who are experiencing family and domestic violence, investigating the role and acceptability of clinical decision support tools, which are often underpinned with AI in primary care. And she has both qualitative and quantitative research experience. As a practicing GP, her interests in women's mental and preventative health care. She also holds a role as a medical editor for the Australian Journal of General Practice. So we've got a really outstanding panel. Welcome, Rim.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with where you all land on the AI spectrum, from total hype to total reservation, and just tell me a little bit about how you're using AI in your research, in your clinical practice. So let's start with Patrick.
Okay. Good question. I would say I'm a little bit mixed, sort of maybe a little bit conflicted in some respects. I'm certainly investigating AI in its applications for learning in healthcare degrees, and so I'm interested in it in that respect. in terms of my own like personal use, I've certainly used it and continue to use it. And when I say it's usually generative AI engines like Spark AI, the university's own engine for particular work tasks, or ChatGPT as well, for maybe more personal tasks if I feel like I can't just rely on Google to help me out with something. I feel like I don't really use it just extensively for any and everything though. Like if I can get away with a Google search, I'm probably going to do that. But if I feel like I need some more targeted advice or something like that, maybe then I'll use a ChatGPT. And then I'm also like always on the lookout for other interesting tools that I feel like could help me in terms of my productivity or how I teach as well. So like I've used Claude AI to generate simulations that students can use to maybe learn a concept better, things like that. I guess the mixed feelings I have maybe when it comes to some of the more ethical or moral type of things in relation to AI. So yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. Mixed. Has that changed over time as well? Did you start off enthusiastic and that shifted over the last year?
Yes, I would say like I started off like maybe a little bit like what's this when ChatGPT came on. Like I wasn't the first adopter, but maybe like early adopter, I'd say. And then sort of like maybe waxed and waned over time with my views. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, tell me about you and your relationship with AI.
I don't know whether I would call it a relationship because it's not a human, but I think I would describe myself as a cautious optimist probably. So I work clinically as a clinical neuropsychologist, and when we see patients, we spend about 14 hours overall from doing our assessment in person, which takes 2 or 3 hours, to writing really long reports. In research, my focus is on trying to improve child and family-centred care, so trying to empower families and help them with their understanding of their child's diagnosis, whereby it be ADHD or a medical condition that's resulted in some difficulties with their thinking and learning. And so clinically, I am very careful with the way I use it. So I think ethics and safety are paramount, and I would never put any confidential information into it. But what I have found it useful for is for saying things like, you're my assistant helping me today. Could you please help me write a summary for a 6-year-old boy who's just been diagnosed with autism about his strengths and cognitive challenges in an affirming and strength-based way with some key strategies to support. And it's really good at providing resources for families that are individualised, but I would never take the output and just give it to the family. It's really important that it's reviewed, and I often make a lot of changes to what comes out because I'm really thinking about the child and the family in front of me, and making sure that we're absolutely using the language that's going to support them.
Thanks, Sarah. Have you found that 14 hours has been reduced at all meaningfully in the way you're using it?
Not yet, but I think there's potential for it to reduce more. So I don't use it for any of my report writing, and I don't use it for a scribe yet. So and a lot of our tests are not automated. So I don't think it's reduced my time, but it's really enhanced my ability to be able to be more family-centred with patients and giving them more time and more resources to support them.
Yeah, that's great. Rim, I'd love to hear about you in primary care and also in your research, how you're thinking and feeling about AI.
So definitely there's been a progression in how I've approached AI. I remember when ChatGPT first launched in 2022 and hearing lots of hype around we're gonna have robots soon, and it's, you know, human life as we know it will change very soon. And I think being a clinician, believing very strongly in evidence-based medicine, I'm very much a realist, and I said I'll believe it when I see it. Now being in the PhD space and certainly attending some of the faculty's workshops on the use of AI in research, I think I'm more, in the same sense, a cautious uptake, maybe an optimist, but still certainly very grounded and realistic about what generative AI can achieve. Like Pat, I use it in some of my efficiencies. So if I have some report writing to do that's not related to my PhD studies, but might be, for example, for my, as co-chair of the Students in Primary Care Research Group, I might use it to generate a sort of template of sorts and then refine it according to what is relevant to our cohort. I think the world of healthcare is probably the pinnacle of where AI can go. So it really needs to be very strong before it can get there, because healthcare is not just about people's bodies, it's about people's lives and people's livelihoods. So it really needs to be top-notch before it can be applied in a safe way. So cautious, realist, and yes, I always am looking for what is actually there rather than just the wish list, which I think is what we all see and read and hear. But hopefully the things that we want out of it can be achieved with time.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a bit of hot and cold, a cautious optimist and a cautious realist, but there's some trending between the three, so that's great. That's a great panel. So, Patrick, I have one question for you in relation to your PhD work. One example is the use of AI-driven virtual patients for communication skills training for healthcare students. And I wondered if you could just talk a bit about the attitudes that you're seeing in your students, and as well as in educators towards these really novel tools. Of course, and just reflecting, we've been talking a lot about AI scribes as well as LLMs, but recognizing there's lots of different AI, and just getting you to reflect, I guess, on that.
Yeah, so I guess when we're talking about AI-driven virtual patients, that could be akin to like a voice bot or a chat bot, or an avatar that is, able to hold a two-way conversation with a student or a learner for them to develop some type of skill, which is not a new thing, but I guess with the advent of generative AI, it means that these tools have really emerged very quickly, very fastly onto the market in the past 2 years in a more realistic way that maybe could actually be well received by students, the thought is. So yeah, I did some work with some educators and students across 9 different disciplines of healthcare. And I guess probably we're going to be speaking a lot about this today, but the opinions were somewhat mixed. There is the good and the bad. Really, I guess the positives or the upsides of using this type of technology were that maybe we can introduce students to a patient-facing simulation where they can learn in a safe environment, make mistakes, but not actually harm a patient. So very early on, educators and students were thinking that, early in a training program, if a student can sit down, take a clinical history from a computer, not a real human, gain some confidence from that experience, and then transfer that into a clinical placement where they're more willing to have a go and sort of practice those skills and feel a bit more confident, that why would that not be a good thing, right? But on the other hand, if this type of technology didn't do what it needs to do, so if it wasn't realistic, if it didn't communicate in a way that's true to how a patient would communicate, if it didn't sound like a real person, if it didn't look like a real person, all of these things, then sort of what's the point? That was a bit of a vibe that came through as well. There were certainly concerns as well, so I think really valid concerns came up about privacy, so privacy of student data. Where is that going? So if I interact with a virtual patient and I've said a particular thing or made a mistake, like, is that data going somewhere? Where is that data going? The whole black box of AI, we don't know with some tools where that data ends up and what it's used for. So having transparency around data in that respect, and not using patient data to create these virtual patients without explicit patient consent was another concern that came up. But also like the ethics and moral sort of concerns around AI usage in general were something that was raised also. So there's sort of the good and the bad, I suppose, from the educators and students' perspectives there. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I wondered if, Rim and Sarah, you wanted to comment using your disciplines when you hear the idea of a virtual patient from a pediatric perspective, from a women's family and domestic violence perspective. What's your immediate reactions to that potential? Do
you want me to go first? I think there's certainly potential, and one of the things I find, so I teach into the Masters of Clinical Neuropsychology program, the paediatric content there, and it's really hard to do role plays and simulations because we don't have a kid there, and so the students pretend to be children and parents, and that works to an extent, but I think there is a role there. I agree with the comments from your students about the ethics of creating real patients and the risk there. I think we would need to be careful of, but and I think it wouldn't replace being in a hospital with a real family and having clinical placement, but I think there's a role earlier on in their training to support that real practical approach. Yep.
Yeah, that sort of supplementary approach was something that was mentioned that you're also, suggesting now, that it's not going to replace other learning activities or placements, but maybe it can supplement quite nicely.
I think something it also gives access to is in regional or remote learning, where you can't get patient actors or you don't have lived experience actors, for example. So there is that accessibility benefit, but then the flip side of that is you're potentially taking away a job from, say, a patient actor. So that ethical dilemma of which do you choose, what are the positives and negatives of each decision. My reflection, and I remember very acutely being a student interviewing patients for the first time and how completely nerve-wracking that is, trying to be present, engaged, attuned to the patient's emotional milieu, talking about confidentiality. I do a lot of mental health, so trying to perform a mental state exam at the same time as offering support and guidance and doing a risk assessment and safety planning, and it's a lot. I'm comfortable saying now I'm experienced enough that I can do it comfortably without feeling nervous, but I do empathise for students when they are in that learning, because it is a bit of a hard slog. I think sometimes in medicine, because things get easier the more you practice them and the more skill you have, we can be a little bit forgetful of how uncomfortable it was as we were training. But as much as I love the development of new technologies, I think probably it speaks to that we need a culture shift and making it okay for students to make mistakes, setting up the system so that it's okay to make mistakes when you're learning. And I really, like, having done recently the Melbourne Teaching Certificate, I do feel comfortable that there is a culture shift and we do support students to make mistakes and to learn from that mistake. And feedback isn't about telling you what you did wrong, but feedback is about constructively helping you do better for the next time. And I really love the idea that students get to first pick what they did really well. So we celebrate the strength, and then we say, okay, well, what do you think could be done differently? So engaging learning in that way. However, again, I do think about that accessibility, and I speak to organisers of the curriculum and how hard it is to organise enough patient actors for all the students, so access really becomes a problem. However, certain things like, for example, domestic and family violence, and we have a wonderful advocate in our group, Katie, who speaks and works with the Weavers, which are the lived experience women, we would never replace them, so nothing for them without them. And I think that is really important, that in advocacy places, we still need to have the human element. And even though natural language processing models can copy that really well, you're still lacking the emotion.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. And I have no idea how we're going for time at all. Sorry, I didn't coordinate a watch. Sorry, can you put your hand up when we need to hear from the audience, because I'm really keen to hear, particularly students in the room, their views. Okay. This is I'm going to pivot. This is a really difficult question, and actually, I'm going to bring the research lens if I'm just for a second, which is research has shown that human and AI together in making decisions collectively perform worse than human alone or AI alone. Now, that's just one meta-analysis, and it's emerging research. It's not specifically in the healthcare context, so we need more evidence around, is that true between clinicians and AI? But I think that dispels perhaps a myth that we might all hold, which is that human and AI will always be better and will improve performance. So I wanted to hear, with that in mind, your views on how we should be dividing tasks in healthcare. What should be the responsibility of a clinician? What should be the responsibility of an AI agent? And just kind of hear your reflections on that.
I'm happy to go first. I feel like it always comes back to the human at the end of the day. You know, the clinician at the end of the day, that's who is ultimately responsible for the patient care, right? I believe that is the case in a legal sense, most likely, that, you know, you are, as the clinician, the buck stops with you. So I think yeah, I've also sort of heard that research that maybe even with like clinical decision making, if you had an AI engine completely doing that solo, that it might perform better than if you as a doctor or another health professional are sort of interacting with the engine to come up with a diagnosis.
I think they call it teaming. I think that's the word they want to stick. Teaming?
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And so I would sort of envision that maybe at least at this earlier stage where there are a lot more questions around what is the role of AI in sort of clinical decision making, that maybe the best way for it to be used is for us to deliver good patient care, and so maybe take away some of the activities that could hold that back, which might be more admin-based activities, which you've spoken about in a respect, in terms of maybe we can help expedite some of the report writing if it's quite repetitive, or maybe we could help use it to create resources for patients or something like that. But of course, yeah, very concerned that it would end up impacting on a clinician's natural learned decision-making process and sort of sway them and lead to a poorer patient outcome in the end than what they would have done by themselves. So I think until we're at a point where it's doing the tasks that it can do well and we're doing our tasks well, then that's, doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I hear that. Sarah, can you respond to that in terms of, I think what Patrick was talking about is really important. Should we be starting in the Australian healthcare setting with AI uses that are lower risk, less clinical risk? Of course, nothing has no clinical risk. Should we be starting with things like AI scribes, dealing with workflow admin tasks, taking that off the hands of psychologists before we get into clinical AI, where we might be diagnosing and treating and making significant clinical decisions about our patients?
Yeah, I think there's risks with scribes as well, actually, and so I think any part, like I wouldn't see a scribe just as an admin part, because it's taking notes about clinical content, and clinicians, it's so important that they're reviewing what happens and working out from what's been scribed what they see as important points to be taking from it. I think that interested in that teaming approach, and I was thinking about, well, are they my teammate? Are we co-decision making here with the AI person, whatever they are, or are they augmenting the way I make a decision? So I'd be interested to understand a bit more about that research and the actual role that the AI is playing in the decision making. I think at the end of the day, us as health professionals and students learning to become health professionals are going to need to be amazing critical thinkers, and are going to need to be able to be thinking holistically and critically to really pick up the nuances that AI, I don't think, is ever going to be able to do, the human nuances of healthcare.
Rim, tell me about clinical decision support in primary care and what your view on teaming is. Are we using that? We're sticking with that word? We can change it.
I don't love that word.
We don't love, okay, this is a vote for no for teaming.
So this is something that I'm sort of battling with right now, because the evidence on clinical decision support tools is, on paper, they look great. They're going to streamline and standardize care. It's going to be equitable. It's going to be accessible. But then only 27 to 35% of clinicians use it. So why? Like, what is the barrier? And I think this comes back to user-centered design. It is important to have human oversight, because if things fail, you need the human to intervene. But even before that, you need to design your tool to fit into the workflow. If there are too many clicks, it's going to get ignored. If it's outrageous, no one's going to use it. And interestingly, we want to understand how it's making its recommendations. So for something like, and we work with the Future Health Today group, which, you know, they do outstanding guidelines-based work. Something like kidney care, it's picking up on parameters in the urine and blood tests to say this patient might require review, check in. So the GP calls the patient, does an assessment, and is now being proven to reduce the risk of hospitalisation due to poor kidney care. So working well. And it's reading, so the clinical decision tool is reading markers in the notes. Now looking at something like domestic and family violence. We know that a patient would like to disclose in a safe and sensitive manner, but it has to be on their terms. How do you think a woman would feel if a clinical decision tool is reading her notes for indicators of domestic violence? This is the question I'm kind of battling. And so we then need to look at, well, what are the clinical indicators? What are those soft markers? Yes, we know that for physical abuse, it's things like bruising, you know, trauma, etc. But there are others that are actually so prevalent. Sexual and reproductive health problems, abdominal pain. How are women going to feel if they're not ready to talk about it and someone asks them? And how are they going to feel when, if they ask the doctor, well, why did you ask me today? The doctor's going to say, oh, because a tool on my computer picked up that you've come in with 5 episodes of abdominal pain. So I think it's complex. There is no perfect answer ready-made. But when I think about how I approach this problem, I come back to that user-centered design. So first I need to talk to women with lived experience. What matters to you? How would you feel? Is this breaking confidentiality and privacy? But at the end of the day, unfortunately, because my supervisor and their team have done so much work in this space, we know that women, if they are asked in a sensitive manner, are happy to be asked, even if they don't feel ready to disclose at that time. However, I would still want to design the tool in a way that women find it okay and clinicians are happy to use it. So it is about asking people, it is about trial testing, and then it is, I think, an acknowledgement that we may not get it right, but we want to strive to continue to improve. So cycles of reiteration based on feedback to make sure we've got the right balance.
Thanks. Yeah, I hear very strongly from all three of you that something that we're seeing a lot in the Validitron and at the centre, which is the math of your AI, whether it's machine learning or deep learning or an LLM, whatever science, data science, is just one piece of how we get these tools into the healthcare system and how we get students to use them. Much bigger, harder problems to solve is how do patients feel about this? How does it work for them? How do clinicians feel? How does it fit into their workflow? So it's really way beyond just the technical questions that we need to answer in order to get this uptake of AI in the healthcare system. So I'm just looking at Zoe, who's not putting her thumb up. So I want to ask one question specifically about learners now. There is concern. I don't want to say panic. I'm going to say panic. There is some panic. I think that the use of AI, whether it's in decision making or whether it's in scribing, whatever its use is, it will de-skill clinicians. It will de-skill the workforce because they will, you know, be getting the AI to basically do tasks for them. And there's a lot of concern about that. I would like to say that I'm questioning whether there's any evidence, is my kind of main thing that I want to say, but I want to hear from you, your perspectives. Will clinicians become, even dare I say, lazy? And kind of what your view is on how bringing AI in would impact the learners today, as well as clinicians who are already in the healthcare system.
I'm going to start here. I think your question is about two different things. So one is about bias, and reliance bias is the big issue. So we know that, And there are some studies now proving, degradation in the human brain if you use AI too much, supposedly. But I think the reality is if someone takes over a certain skill set from you, you will rely on them to do it. And so by default, your experience is more rusty. That's the first component. The second is, what is a clinician? And I think a clinician is a lifelong learner and someone who is looking to make an improvement in their patient's outcome or quality of life. You can't change that, and AI is not going to take that over. In fact, time and time again, what I am talking to my colleagues about is burnout. And I'm saying to them, don't drive yourself to over-efficiency. And I think that's one of the real risks of tools in healthcare, is if it takes away the simple, straightforward tasks and you are left to deal with all of the complex tasks all the time, what are you left with? What can you keep giving to your patient? And I think, and we had this wonderful speaker who spoke about his use of AI in his research and proficiency. And he described two very real examples of his own burnout, where because he was so efficient with all of his tasks, he was just doing too much. And so I kind of take the student advocacy approach, but also the person advocacy approach. Use these tools, if you're allowed to, in a safe and ethical way, to make your job easier with oversight, but don't let it burn you out. Don't. And I think, don't forget that you still have a skill set in some other way. It doesn't have to be the person who types. It's the person who counsels. It's the person who advocates. It's the person who's a leader. And so there'll always be something for a clinician to do and learn about.
There is a real risk, I think, from some of these tools with just infinitely increasing productivity at all costs. Sarah, Patrick, I want to hear from you about this de-skilling fear.
So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, us neuropsychologists were a bit scared that the MRI machine was going to take over our jobs because we specialise in brain-behaviour relationships, and that didn't happen. But we adapted, and we now use MRI machines as a really important tool in our practice. When I was doing my PhD, I needed to go down to the Bellevue Library and look for a book on the shelf and take it over, and I had a card to swipe on the photocopy machine, and I would photocopy the journal articles. And I think that's a skill that I don't need, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. Yeah. So I think there's parts that I'm happy to be de-skilled in, maybe, and I think that allows more time for us to do the really complex thinking and complex work that we do as clinicians, and also the work that we do to be really human with patients. And I think we have an opportunity, if we can speed up some of the processes in our workflow, we have an opportunity to be more human and spend more time with families and patients to understand them and their story and what they need. So I guess that's where I sit on that.
I'd like to echo what you said, that not all cognitive de-skilling, as we're talking about, is a bad thing. I think probably over time there's been so many different things or technologies that have come along that people have been like, oh my God, you're going to de-skill in this realm. Instead of being able to tell a story, the advent of books and writing, we're going to lose that ability there. But actually there's a lot of upsides to that. Or, with using computers, typing, we're not going to know how to handwrite anymore. Some of these things maybe
aren't. To be fair, I can't handwrite anymore.
Yeah, well, is that a bad thing though?
Yes,
do you need a handwrite?
That's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah. What I would be more concerned about is, not maybe necessarily established clinicians de-skilling. I would hope that they are able to recognize what they need to continue to do as part of their roles, but more the fact that maybe students who are learning to become healthcare professionals don't actually cognitively upskill or learn the skills that they need to, because they are, already offsetting things to generative AI engines. I have come across students who are approaching a reflective task by using ChatGPT. So are you actually developing that reflective lifelong learning, you know, those skills that you need as a clinician if you have never done that because you're able to pass an assignment by using a generative AI engine. I think I'm quite concerned about that, and that we really need good assessments that are robust, that ensure that we are graduating students who have the skills that they need to have in their healthcare profession and can't sort of slip through without developing those skills.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm conscious of, what's the time now? Sorry. Keep going, we're still okay? Okay, great. So that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, I mean, this is a real buzzword as well. There's this idea that now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. I don't think there's, well, I don't want to make assumptions. I don't think there's any historians in the room. If there is, I'm sorry. So I think that's a conversation for them about whether or not we really are in a fourth industrial revolution. But if you can assume that we are right now, in your training, what you learned about how to work with computers and whatever was happening in that third wave of technology, what do you think can be applied from that to now? Or do we need a new paradigm in how to train students in AI literacy, in these kinds of topics that we're discussing in relation to how to discern between things that are de-skilling versus not? I just wondered if you could reflect on that.
I think we probably are in the fourth industrial revolution. Like, it's pretty revolutionary in terms of what's changing, and I think more and more people are using AI now in their everyday. And as health professionals, I think if we're not learning to do it and use it as well, it potentially will get left behind. It's interesting the idea of digital natives growing up in this world at the moment, and I think about my son who will grab my iPad and he'll speak into it. He won't type anymore, and he's quicker than me at doing anything, but he doesn't know how to use it safely, and he doesn't know what the risks are, and he doesn't know what ethical use of it is, and also even simple communication skills and how he might communicate with his friends on it in a respectful, supportive way. So I think I think we do need to pivot a little bit in the way we support and train students, and it's probably a balanced approach between helping to make sure that they do skill up in using new tools, and I think that's what we've probably done throughout our evolution. We've continually upskilled, and I like your comment about being lifelong learners. When I first trained, it was before the neurodiversity movement, and now so the way I practice is quite different to the way I practice now, and I needed to upskill and change the way I work with young people and families. So yeah, I think it's getting the balance right, and yes, robust assessments to ensure that we can be reflective and critical thinkers, but also integrating the use of AI tools into assessment and learning as well.
I actually feel that the last true, like, if we're talking about digital native generation, was millennials. Like, I'm a millennial, and I feel like there's a bit of a...
Shout out to the millennials.
Yeah, shout out millennials. I feel like there's a bit of a difference in what I'm seeing now with current students who are Gen Z, and the sort of ability to maybe troubleshoot with technology or learn new technology. I think maybe there's an element of just growing up with this technology, you know, from the get-go, whereas like older generations would have to learn a new technology when it would come along, and there was a lot of new different technologies that came along, you know, across the 90s, early 2000s and whatnot. Whereas,
so wait,
like,
are you saying Gen Z are better or worse at learning technology?
I think worse. Yeah, I think maybe
You heard it here
controversially a little bit worse.
Yeah.
In terms of the fact that most of the technologies that we're using today probably sort of already existed and were there, ready to be used, and have been used by the younger generation now, not to sound, you know, like old man shouts at cloud. But yeah, I think that I do see a bit of a shift in students now with the ability to pick up new technologies and trial and troubleshoot and that sort of thing. So I'm not entirely convinced that it's any technology that comes along is immediately going to be receiving big uptake from students, and you know, all students will use it. Yeah.
I'm just going to put it out there though that new technologies are more user friendly. The first computer was built without a mouse, so you had to type instructions into it, and if you didn't know the coding language, you couldn't use it. Whereas now it is voice enhanced devices. So yeah, who knows if it's easier versus they're more willing to learn it. I'm probably going to reflect on, you know, what I remember, and I've practiced now clinically for nearly 10 years, so I've seen a lot of change. In general practice, being private industry, the uptake of computer programs was probably 70% really quickly. So compared to the hospitals, which were still on paper documentation, and if you lost the file, everyone's in trouble, and you had to run things to the pharmacy to get medication. Like, I'm quite proud to be a specialist general practitioner because we had computers and EMR quite early. Not perfect, but I think the idea is around continual improvement. Systems, and the key problem is around interoperability. You don't want to be minimizing one screen, waiting for another screen to open up, transferring data across, copy, paste, all of that. And I think that just all adds to the burden of using digital technology in healthcare. If we think about my health record, and I'm really glad that the government's looking to change it, it is a shoebox of PDFs. It's incredibly unhelpful when you're trying to get things really quickly. But in terms of getting data, you certainly can access it more readily than needing to go to the basement and getting a big folder. What I was trying to get at is things change, mistakes happen along the way, but as long as we have an impetus to try to drive change and efficiency for the betterment of the patient outcome, that's okay. I still, though, will remember working at the emergency department and the power goes out and we all pull out a big box of written paper records and have to go back to handwriting. So, I don't know, unless someone's got a backup of that, I just don't know how safe it is to not keep skilled. Yeah. Now, AI in healthcare is present, and particularly in the imaging centre. So I've worked with a gastroenterologist friend, and she said to me they have AI in their colonoscopy systems. So the report doesn't just look at what the user is looking at on the screen, but there is a computer program looking at the image. And we know that, you know, based on, for example, retinal detection images or mammography scans, or there's a number of different fields in which AI in imaging has been at least as good as, if not better, than human detection. And so she now has the benefit of an AI saying to her, oh, what about this little thing? Is it a polyp? It's not quite the same. And they're now using it, actually, there's some researchers with Melbourne Connect who are using it for skin cancer detection. So it's got real good applicability, but it's a little different with the human element. And I still go back to like making, and I know mental health is niche, but it's so simple just to diagnose anxiety or depression. You know, you tick box the DSM criteria. It's not too difficult. But can you formulate why the patient is there? And if you don't ask the questions, and even if you do, the AI scribe that's listening to you is not going to put it in the way that you can understand whether or not this patient is safe to go home, whether or not this patient is going to get psychological care, whether or not this patient is going to take their medication. It's I think, a little bit more nuanced. And having an algorithm that reads patterns in words is not going to achieve that. It's always going to need that human experience, and that's something you need to strive to continue to do. Yeah.
Thank you. As you're all talking, I was reflecting on, I'm going to butcher this phrasing, but someone way smarter than me said that historically, the medical profession, clinicians, the healthcare workforce, they were trained in medicine and they understood data. But with the AI transformation, they need to now be data scientists who understand medicine. And that we really need to kind of transform, this was the person's point, transform how we train the next generation. And I guess to finish up the last set of questions I wanted to ask you, you're teaching into the master's programs respectively in your medical disciplines. Just if you could reflect on, are we there yet in teaching data science, data knowledge, AI literacy, all of those skills that the medical profession needs? Or do you think that that's one of those overhyped statements and that medicine is what it always was? And yes, you just need to understand data a little bit more.
Are we there yet? No. I feel like, as with most probably professions, fields, when it comes to AI, there's a lot of catch-up still happening and a lot of like upskilling that needs to occur, not only within healthcare professions for working clinicians, but also for educators and for, you know, emerging professionals as well, students. So I feel like we do need a shift in how we are delivering healthcare professions training. And we do need to think about how we are teaching about how to use AI technologies and what the technologies can and can't do, and, you know, how they are actually being used in clinical practice now. But then there's also the other side of things, in terms of incorporating these technologies into teaching as well, not only for students to learn, but also as part of their preparation for when they do go into clinical practice, having exposure to certain tools too. I suppose that relies on those tools being readily available and accessible to teaching programs. You know, yes. A lot of AI tools come with a cost, they have a subscription, so it can be difficult, you know, depending on your field or your program, to be able to deliver that type of experience. But at least, at the very least, having AI literacy and, you know, guidance for students around this whole field is important, for sure.
We're going to, I don't want to run out of time, we want to hear from the audience, but so let's get the roving mic going, but feel free to just, while we're put your hand up if you have any questions and we'll hand over a mic, but feel free to just react to that
Just one quick point, particularly primary care. So because as practitioners we operate kind of in little silos, data is so hard to get. Quality data is pretty much impossible to get. So I love data. So my notes, like I can vouch for myself, is a really good reflection of what I'm thinking for that patient and their next steps. So if another clinician comes and picks up, they know what was going on in my head. It is really hard when you care for other people's patients and you don't have that. But fortunately, I have the skill set of being able to ask all the questions, so I can get that. But in somewhere where you've got multiple clinicians treating one patient in a single time point, like a hospital, that's where data becomes so important. And we need to change our perspective from the medical notes being a doctor's representation of the here and now to being a form of data knowledge that can provide evidence-based medicine in future. So I think that shift in the curriculum, but it still has to fit into the workflow. So you can't have like a doctor spending a really long time putting in data entry notes. So yeah, it's a tricky place, but you do need to sit on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I agree. Can I say something really quickly about it as well? So I don't know whether there's any psychologists here or training psychologists, but we train in a scientist practitioner model. So all of those stats classes you do as undergrad are putting you in very good stead to be data scientists. Yes. So I think that's really important. And the other thing I think that's important is to understand what AI is. And I think that some clinicians and maybe students don't always understand, and like it is a large language model at the end of the day, and it's not a human. And I think around those things around informed consent, making sure that you as a clinician understand what you're doing when you're doing it and where the data's going and how it's being used is so important. So I agree that that really needs to be integrated into our training programs.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so we have time now. We've got 10 minutes for some questions. So I'm keen to hear from students in the audience healthcare professionals, anyone who has a question for any one of us. Up here.
I'm happy to yell out.
Go ahead.
Dr. Garley, you mentioned earlier future health today and the ability for us to be able to predict things like chronic kidney disease was possible because the data was structured, extremely structured. And so we could apply algorithms, but so much is held in notes. And the value of the notes was just invaluable. But we need tools like AI to be able to do that sort of interpretation, especially over long periods of time. So, and especially when you were talking earlier about domestic violence and issues like that. So how do we use one but not the other? Or how can we use AI to get the value? And it's not necessarily to come up with an answer for you, for the GP, but to prompt the GP with the questions. Ask the patient this or ask them that. So how do we move forward?
Thank you for that question. It's actually, could spend a good 2 hours talking about this. I don't think it's about proceeding without AI. I think AI is here to stay, and I think we need to wield it with rigor. So I think the ethics, the privacy needs to be solid, and that's not my job, but it's great for the TGA and everybody else who works on it. I'll always remain a patient advocate, and so for me, the data that gets put in and read by AI cannot go anywhere else. Like, it's full stop. I'm working with a group at the Melbourne School of Public Health, and we are doing exactly that, working with free text notes to look at general practice management of adolescent health. So it's social problems that you can't code for in the medical notes. There's no drop-down field that says teenager with sexual health risk problems. It's all in the free text note. And interestingly, we're coding. So you actually need a human to teach the language model what indicators exist. Interestingly, myself and one of the other clinician researchers, we code richly because we read between the lines of the GP notes. When that GP has documented painful sex, for example, they're not just asking about risk of STI, they're also asking about emotional safety. How do you code that? Whereas someone who isn't clinical may glance at that and look absence of sexual health risk. So I think the people who are involved in this research need to be health informatics and clinicians. I think we need to put forward good cases for how we can responsibly use this knowledge. And this is a problem around data ethics, and I'm having trouble getting data ethics for my project, which is well and truly acceptable. Like, it needs to be rigorous. But at the end of the day, we still need to, exactly like you said, use it as a prompt. It can't take over the consultation. And I'm just like, I have fantastic conversations with my supervisor because, I'm quite sensitive around, the little pop-up box has to be nuanced, it can't be obvious, etc. And she said, no, the clinicians know. You're not going to ask a woman in front of her partner, is your relationship safe? And it just, it makes me laugh, but it's so real that the clinician is still in control and producing good quality care. And all this clinical tool does is it gives them an opportunity to think about if this is the right time to ask. And if you look at the Marin framework, which has like 2 pages of questions, it's there if they want to ask it, but they don't have to. It's enough for them to use their clinical acumen, their risk holding, and to determine, is this the right set of questions to ask the patient? And if not, there's a little X and they can close it. So I hope that answers your question.
We have time for at least 2 more questions. Go ahead. We'll take these 2. In any order.
Hi, just wondering, how do you reassure healthcare workers, as opposed to GPs, or inclusive of, that AI is not going to replace them? Because you've spoken a lot about working with AI and the need for the practitioner to actually be the person in control of the appointment. But other healthcare workers, I do feel there's a bit of anxiety in the community about AI taking their role and then being left redundant. So how do you go about reassuring those workers that's not going to happen based on what you've discussed?
That's a great question. I have, in 2000, someone in the US, some Silicon Valley type, said we should stop training radiographers right now. Every radiographer in school should quit, and there will be absolutely no radiographers at all in 2030. So that's 5 years away, and I heard from a radiologist at the Melbourne Business School who was speaking that they've never been busier and they've never needed more radiology, and there's such a work shortage profession. So I do think some of the anxiety is Australia-wide. There is concern at the moment that AI is going to impact lots of different workforces, including healthcare. So it feels like a bigger problem than just healthcare, but I guess I feel very also reassured that prediction so far about how AI will replace healthcare has been completely wrong to date. But keen to hear from my colleagues if in their specific disciplines they hear differently.
Yeah, I don't think AI is going to replace psychologists, but we have a mental health crisis, and we don't have enough psychologists to provide support to all the people that need it. And so I think maybe a tiered approach might be the way and obviously we're still learning and it's all in trial, but I don't think that it will replace, but I think it will enhance our capacity to deliver care to more people. I think change makes people feel uncertain and anxious always, and I think to the healthcare workers that are feeling nervous about their jobs, I would be thinking about, well, how are you adapting and how are you being a lifelong learner, and how are you thinking in the future what your role is going to look like, and maybe AI is integrated within that and what that looks like. But, we live in a world now where people seem to, maybe not so much in health, but in other areas, people change careers 7 or more times. And I think that, being adaptable humans is probably going to be where we need to be.
I have a short answer. Tell them to turn their social media off.
Here. Patrick, do you have any?
I mean, any person that says they know what's going to happen with AI is probably wrong, because no one will actually truly know. But I think it would come back to thinking about technology or technological solutions as demand-driven. So if there is demand for AI to take over part of healthcare's role or healthcare workers' role, then so be it. But I think that, what is the demand? It's going to come down to that, really. Is there patients that are actually wanting this, or is there clinicians that are wanting it? Like, where is it being driven from? And then I think at the end of the day, if we're thinking about healthcare, most patients actually want to talk to a human. We are social beings. So can you really replace me as a clinician in the room with you, testing your child's hearing and observing them in the room? Is an AI engine actually going to be able to do that? It would need to be very sophisticated and complex, not to toot my own horn, but, there would need to be a lot of advancements with AI and other technologies to completely replace roles. I think maybe supplement, sure, but I don't think anyone's out of a job yet.
Yep. Thank you. I'm going to, I have to stop us there. I'm getting the wind-up signal. We're going to have a tour at 1:45, so please stick around and ask your question. We'll answer it. Any other questions you have. I'm just conscious of sharing this slide as the last thing. As I mentioned, at the Validitron, come on the tour with us. You'll be able to see this is the place where the University of Melbourne is trying to answer so many of these questions. What is the workflow? What is the design? How much do clinicians and patients trust this AI tool? So come on the tour. The QR code is go ahead to the next slide, sorry. This is some of the courses that the centre offers. If you're a student or if you're a healthcare learner and you're interested in gaining some of these skills, please feel free to check out our education offerings. And thank you so much all for being here today. We'll just leave this slide up. This is another course that we're running if you're interested in pharma and how to pitch. Again, please visit the centre's site. We have a whole range of workforce and education opportunities that are around exactly these topics. And we'll see you for the tour if you're sticking around.